Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little for PokerCoaching.com, here today reviewing a gigantic pot that Rampage Poker played at 1-2 no limit. When I say gigantic, I mean $16,000. I can't even count how many big blinds that is. It's a lot. I don't know much about Rampage Poker, but he is crushing it on YouTube, so check out his YouTube channel. We'll have a link to it below in the comments section. Let's take a look at these pocket kings and we will see, well, how we would have played it, how he plays it, and I'm just gonna give my general thoughts on his thought process throughout his commentary.
Okay, everyone, strap in. We need some seatbelts on because this one's a roller coaster. We have pocket kings in +1. We have a stack of 6,500-ish in front of us, and on this table, we can't keep going multi-way.
All right, $6,500 deep playing 1-2 no limit. Look, I have no problem playing super deep stacked. No problem at all. But you have to make sure you're happy playing for all of the money, especially if your opponents will run bluffs. I'm not sure where this game is, how this game plays. It doesn't really matter. What matters is the idea that if you're not cool losing $6,500 in one hand at 1-2 no limit, maybe you shouldn't be playing that deep. To be fair, maybe he bought in for like 1,000 and he's just winning all the pots. I don't know. I'm observing this hand in a vacuum. Take it for what it's worth. There is the idea that you can play super deep stacked like this, $6,500 deep, with the idea that you're only going to put your money in with the nuts, and your opponents are so bad that they are going to sometimes put $6,500 at 1-2 no limit in with far worse than the nuts. But, you know, that's not always true, especially if your opponents are in there battling. However, look, if you have an edge over your opponents, you should be pretty happy to play deep stacked with them, especially if you have position on them. If you have 6,500, the two players to your left have 6,500, and then everybody else has 200, that's actually a really bad spot to be in. You always want the big stacks on your right and the short stacks on your left, because chips flow to the left in no limit Texas Hold'em. All right, he also mentioned he does not want the pot to continue going multi-way. This is a issue that a lot of 1-2 no limit players deal with, because if you raise, let's say, $6 like you may do online, you're gonna get 8 callers. So what are your options? Well, you can just raise bigger. I think a very viable strategy is to just raise bigger with your best hands. Just raise big with a strong linear range so that your opponents put money in poorly, right? In some games like this, a standard raise may be to 10 big blinds, $20. And if you make it $20, everybody will call. Fine, make it 40, see what happens, right? You need to experiment with what will result in you getting called by one marginal hand. The problem with raising big, though, so let's say $20 or $40 or whatever, is that as you go bigger and bigger, your opponents are going to fold a lot of the junk you want to get action from. Like when you raise to $6, they're going to call with 9-7 offsuit in a lot of these games, and they're just torching their money. There's also this idea that you don't want to go multi-way with big pairs, and you got to realize that you make money when your opponents make errors. And more often than not, you're going to have a strong overpair, and that's going to be the best hand if you go 2, 3, 4, 5 ways. As you start seeing the flop very multi-way, though, you are no longer going to have the best hand a decent amount of the time. And that is okay, because when you raise to, let's say, $6 or $10 before the flop and everybody calls with junk, you have a substantial equity advantage. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pull up Equilab real quick and show this to you, because this is a very, very important concept that a lot of people do not, either they don't fully grasp or they don't care about. They just want to win the pot, but winning the pot is not the goal. Let's give you pocket kings. I say winning the pot's not the goal. The goal is to win money. Just want to make that clear. And then let's give our opponents calling ranges, okay? This is going to be a range they're going to call our pre-flop raise with. And we're going to make it wide, because in these games, 1-2 no limit, people are calling with all sorts of junk. You may say this is too wide. You may say this is too tight. Who knows, right? Who knows what it's actually going to be? We have them 3-betting the best hands. And I said they called 9-7 offsuit, right? So we're going to presume they're calling some pretty bad stuff because they're loose and splashy and passive, right? That's how they operate. Let's give them this range. It may be slightly different. And now what we're going to do is we're going to give everybody else this range too. So here we are. We're going to play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ways. We click evaluate here, and we see that 6 ways, we're going to win this hand, if everybody gets to the showdown, 41% of the time. Less than half. And a lot of people say, oh my God, less than half, that's terrible. But realize we're putting in 1/6 of the money. Also, a lot of these junky hands are not going to get to the showdown, right? If your opponent flops a bad gut shot, they're not going to get to the showdown all that often. And if they do get to the showdown every time with a bad gut shot, they're going to end up with, you know, a junky high card a lot of the time. They're not going to make a straight more often than not. So we're putting in a small portion of the money, and we're going to have a giant equity advantage, and that is fine. And the way you beat a lot of these small stakes games are either by just playing better cards than your opponents, or by getting them to pay you off for lots of money very poorly when you in turn do not pay them off very poorly. What it amounts to is, as you see the pot multi-way, you got to realize your kings are not going to be the best hand by the river a lot of the time, and that's fine. It's okay. And your job is to get full value from your opponents. In these games, a huge amount of equity is going to be won by you just value betting when you have the best hand, and then when they raise you, the loose passive opponents, when they raise you on the turn in the river, you just fold. It's okay, move on with your life. I know we've... who knows how long this video is so far, and we haven't even seen what's happening yet, but there's a lot to this spot, and it causes a lot of people problems, like this thought process of, I want to be afraid to see a multi-way pot. Anyway, in this scenario, let's see what happens. He goes for the limp.
The young player folds, and I'm going to do something weird and limp. Now, Wolfgang on my left raises to $20. And why did we not
1-2 no limit, limp raised to 20. You see they're blasting it, right?
open before? Because 4 players make the call for 20. This is exactly why we didn't want to raise. We're going for that good old limp 3-bet because I think that'll work here in this spot.
So when he says he thinks that will work, again, understand that if we see a 4-way flop or 5-way flop, let's say we see it 4 ways, this is great. Imagine, let's get out the calculator here. We put in $150 each because they all limp and they call. Pot's going to be $600, right? We're going to get out our old school calculator, $600, and we put in 150 of it, right? Our equity in this pot, 4 ways, is going to be $55, or 55%, right? Minus the 150 we put in. If we get this limp re-raise in, we get $180 in equity when we see it multi-way. That is huge. Now look, obviously I realize equity realization is a thing. Everybody who is super strong poker player here, bear with me, we're trying to give some rough math to show that you're happy when your opponents put in a lot of money with marginal ranges. Obviously as well, they're probably not going to call a $20 raise and then $150 raise with all this junk. It's a little bit overly simplistic, but the point here is that it's not that bad to go multi-way because you have a big advantage. You just have to make sure you play well after the flop. And what a lot of people do wrong is they just drastically overplay their big hands, aces, kings, queens, etc., after the flop when they're in a multi-way pot against on boards that are not great for them.
So when action is onto me, we put in that limp 3-bet trying to isolate. We size to $150.
So again, trying to isolate, that implies we're trying to get heads up, which, you know, is fine, but you'd rather be in a very multi-way pot against a lot of presumably not great players because they're just going to be making middle pairs and bottom pairs and top pairs and paying you off poorly.
A little bit smaller here, but once again, I don't really know what the resistance point is when people call or fold. But clearly, 150 is not a lot because when the preflop raiser Wolfgang gets out of the way, we get 3 players to call around. So now, yep, 4 ways to a flop in this 3-bet pot where we just tried to isolate. But we got 620 in the pot. The flop comes 8-7-6.
Pause real quick. This is going to be like an hour-long video, isn't it? If you like this hour-long video, do me a favor, click the like and subscribe button below. I appreciate it. Also, click the notification bell. 9.324% of you have clicked the notification bell. You might as well bump that up to 10.3% after today. Give it a click. Thank you. This is a scenario where when it goes limp 20, call, 150, fold, call. Now, it's kind of actually difficult to know what the opponent's ranges are. You have to presume they're going to be reasonable, right? You got to presume the opponents are not in here with a 9-7 offsuit for $150. So let's go through here and give them a reasonable range. What do we think reasonable humans who are loose, splashy, etc., which clearly they are because they're in this pot, what do we think they're actually going to call the 150 with? If we're all 6,500 deep, the big offsuit hands go way down in value. If they're like $400 deep, then, you know, maybe they're okay. But even then, these hands are pretty bad. I think in reality, we're probably looking at something like this. This is loose. This is not what the opponents should be doing. This is what I think a lot of people are doing. So we see this range is actually still kind of wide, right? So let's keep that in mind. Obviously, they could be like randomly slow playing aces, kings, or queens, ace, king, but most of the time they're not going to be doing that. Anyway, 8-7-6. Let's just consider the ranges we are against. In this scenario, on 8-7-6, notice our opponents have all the sets and some number of straights and some number of 2 pairs, right? So this is actually a very bad board because notice that we're only really going to get full value here from like ace-8 suited, jacks, 10s, 9s, maybe 5s, right? Everything else here is pretty bad. Also, there's flush draw available, and they do have some good flush draws. Do we block it? We do block the king flush draw, so there's going to be fewer of those, really just a few of these that also have gut shot straight draws, which also have very high equity. This is a spot where when you bet and the opponent's call, you're usually in pretty marginal shape. Also, notice if the opponents would have folded to a bet, it's usually just going to be with these suited ace-x or like low pairs or ace-queen, which are drawing very thin against us. So this is a spot where very multi-way, even though we have the best hand most of the time, it's not going to be particularly great for us. You know what? Do we actually have the best hand most of the time? Let me apply this range here and clear out these 2 ranges and then put these ranges here. Let's put the board. 8 of clubs. What was the board? 8 of spades, 7 of clubs, 6 of clubs. 8 of spades, 7 of clubs, 6 of clubs. We'll run this. Notice here, our equity dropped substantially, right? We were, 55% pre-flop. Now here we are 35%. And if we bet and get called, again, you got to be very, very cautious in this scenario because we're really only getting called by like decent draws, like open-ended straight draws and better, and mostly very good made hands, especially if they don't have stuff like king 8, 10 8, jack 8, etc. Okay, so be a little bit cautious here.
2 clubs. Overall, just a disgusting and gross board that we didn't want to see. Anyways, when action checks to me, I decided to c-bet this one, really small amount to $200. 4 ways, this is extremely thin, but given what I've seen so far, I think we just have to get value with these overpairs.
So he says, given what we have seen so far, we got to get value. So again, this kind of presumes the opponents are playing really, really loose, really, really splashy. And let's just go through here and edit this opponent's range really quick and just see what we're going to be looking at. First things first, let's get rid of all of the obviously terrible hands. Will they fold ace-5? Maybe not. Let's go through here in suit selection. Just clubs for these. Obviously, these are not available. These will be gut shots or overcards with open-endeds. I think they'll probably call any 9 for 200, right? Because they're getting really good odds. They'll probably call jack 10 as well, any jack 10. Okay, so now we click suit selection, select clubs. They're probably not going to float with backdoor spades. Maybe they will, who knows. All right. And these are all going to fold here because these are not available because we have the king of clubs, right? So that's fine. These are all going to fold, of course, to any bet, you got to think. Unless they're going to call ace-queen on this board. That seems ridiculous. These are going to fold. All right, so opponents' ranges are going to look something like this for a $200 bet, roughly. Okay. Do we do this right? Let's just make sure. Okay, so this is the range we want. We're going to clear out these 2. Against 1 caller on this board, you see, we are barely ahead. If they're anywhere near reasonable, and again, I think this pre-flop range is like way too loose. I don't think they have many of these suited ace-x. Don't think they have these high cards to begin with a lot of the time. They may splash around with these hands, so this makes a lot of sense. But this range is probably going to be somewhat reasonable for loose, flashy players. Against 2 people here, notice we're down to 33% equity. If we go 200 and get called, if we go 200 and all 3 of them call, and they're reasonable, you see now all of a sudden we are behind, right? And this is very, very important. Our equity realization with this hand is going to be really bad. What I mean by that is say any 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, club, if any of those cards come, those are all really bad for us, where we essentially have to just check fold. Because, again, considering the opponent's ranges, right, all of those cards are going to really line up with them. Let me actually show you what happens on various cards. Let's say the turn is the 8 of hearts, okay? Actually, that's not so bad. Why? Because I guess they don't have all that many 8s like we said. Let's make it the 9 instead, 9 of hearts. Oh, by the way, so even though this doesn't look so bad, we have 33%. When they give us action, it's going to be mostly with better hands at this point. So even though we have an equity advantage, we are going to lack the nut advantage, and they are probably going to fold out the weakish hands then. So it's not as good as it looks, just straight up. 9's obviously awful. We're just dead. Let's make it 10 of hearts. 10 of hearts is awful, just dead. What about 5 of hearts? 5 of hearts is terrible. We're just dead. What about Queen of clubs, random club? It's okay, mainly because we have a flush draw. But again, like if they blast it, Probably got to fold, right? Bad equity realization. What about 5 of clubs? Bad. What about 2 of clubs? Not great, right? So you see, all these cards are pretty terrible. Let's do 2 of diamonds. This is a good one. Even then, even though it's good, it's, again, we're not just like crushing the opponents. This is a spot where we're going to have very, very poor equity realization, and for that reason, you just don't want to put money in the pot. Also, if we bet here and get raised, don't forget this, if we bet and get raised, how are we going to assess the opponent's range, right? I would not be shocked if some players will raise with draws here, and some players will only raise with effective nuts. I have no way of knowing. And I think betting leads to us getting, we'll call it outplayed some portion of the time, and I don't really think we're pushing that much equity here. Look, Rampage did make this very clear statement that we are going for thin-ish value here. This is a thin bet, which I completely agree with. I would have to know my opponents are just especially weak and passive to justify this bet size, but maybe they are, right? There's a lot of value in exploiting your opponents in small stakes games, and if they are weak and passive, then this is certainly a reasonable exploit. However, I think I would have bet a little bit bigger, because if we are pushing equity and we do expect the opponents to play poorly and weakly, you just want to bet more money. Typically on these very coordinated boards, you just want to get more money in the pot when you have the best hand. So if the pot's 620, I would have bet more like 350, expecting to get called by basically the same range I outlined, right? Notice this range I outlined here is all reasonable. It's going to call any reasonable bet. So I think this is a spot where you probably just want to bet a little bit bigger. But whatever, 200.
The cutoff, who's been playing fairly loose, makes the call. Now the button makes the call. And the big blind calls as well. So we eliminated the field from 4 ways to the flop to 4 ways to the turn. The turn is now the 8 of hearts. It is all around, in my opinion, a pretty decently bad card for us. I don't know what that means. Obviously, top pair turns into trips, but it's less likely someone has an 8x holding. So
let's talk about this really quick. So we get the 8 of hearts, which we already saw was a reasonable card. 8 of hearts. Calculate. You see 33% equity. But again, the problem is now, if we bet and get called, what's going to call us on this 8 of hearts for any reasonable bet, even like third pot? Will ace-7 call? Probably not, right? So let's go through and assume if we make a bet, the opponents will fold some pretty junky hands. 7-6 will now fold. 8s will obviously call. How about 9s, 10s, jacks? It's pretty nasty. I guess they'll call. Flush draws are obviously going to call. What about the 9s? Do we think a 9 is going to call a bet on this board 4 ways? They shouldn't, but let's presume they will. Let's presume they will, because we're just going to assume they're terrible. I'm trying to give us every benefit of the doubt here, right? All right, let's see how we're looking at now. We remove some of those junky hands. You see we are, okay. Let's go through and remove some 9s now, to just, make this not so amazing for us. It's not going to change a ton, but it should change a little bit. And again, these ranges, like I said, are already pretty loose. We see now, if we bet and get called, it's like roughly break even. But again, equity realization on the river is going to be very bad because there's a lot of terrible rivers.
And we have the best
I would just
combo. Anyways, when action checks to me again, given the dynamics of the table, I am going to be a little bit exploitative and go very, very thin once again and throw out a bet of $350. Well,
so now, I actually don't hate the small bet. Like, if we had to bet, on the flop, I think we should have bet big. But on the turn, I think we can justify the smaller bet, because now, even though we have perhaps a little bit of a range advantage, we definitely lack the nut advantage. And in spots like this, you either want to be checking a ton or you want to be betting small. We actually discussed this thoroughly at pokercoaching.com in the fundamentals course. Check that out. It's completely free at pokercoaching.com/fundamentals. And Rampage Poker does decide to bet, which I probably just checked here, but he does make the small bet. If you are going to bet, small bet is good. And I realize $350, what is this? 175 big blinds? Is that right? 175 big blinds at 1-2 is not a small bet, but in relation to this already gigantic pot, it is a small bet.
350 is still enticing of a price, especially given how big this pot is. The cutoff makes the call.
So he says this is an enticing price. The thing is that you're not really giving your opponents bad odds to call in this scenario. If they have any straight draw or flush draw, they're going to win 20-ish% of the time against you. And notice, in this scenario, they're only going to need to win, assuming these graphics are right, what, like 1/7 of the time? It's like almost never, right? So when you bet tiny, you're not inducing mistakes from your opponents. You make money when your opponents screw up. And this small bet is going to get a lot of calls. The thing is, though, is that all of the hands that are going to call you are calling very appropriately. Now, if they are going to call with like, I don't know, queen 6 or something, then sure, I love the bet. But do they really have queen 6? Like if they have any pair, it probably has a straight draw with it. Like even if they have 6-5, it has a straight draw. So they're not making an error by calling. And when you are betting in these scenarios, usually you want to make a bet that makes it to where it's at least an error for your opponent to continue with some portion of their range.
Who's been playing very loose, and so does the big blind. So we go 3 ways to the river, which comes the deuce of spades. It is the most brick river we could ever ask for.
All right, I'm going to presume the opponent checks. Pot is $2,500, and we have what, $5,700 behind, something like that. I want you to think about this scenario. Pause the video and write what you would do in the comment section below on this super blank river. In the spot, would you check it if they check to you? Would you bet small, like 1,000? Would you bet medium, like 2,000? Or would you bet gigantic, like all in? Go ahead, pause the video, write it in the comment section below. All right, did you do it? Good. Going through this active learning process is going to go a long way to helping you improve your poker skills because it's like you're playing along. I actually have over 1,000 interactive hand quizzes at my training site, pokercoaching.com, and you can try them for free at pokercoaching.com/free. Many of the students just go through the quizzes and they just sit there and grind it out all day, every day. If you do not want to go play live poker because of, you're worried about COVID or you live in a place where online poker is not legal, then it's a great way to go and get experience with a coach sitting there giving you feedback on every single betting round. So check that out at pokercoaching.com/free. So if they check to Rampage Poker, I would definitely check. If we bet and get called, now we got to presume all the draws are going to fold, right? So if we bet this river and get called, what's this river? River is the 2. What's going to call us? This is going to fold. Will ace-8 call? Yeah, of course, we lose that. So maybe we get called by this if we shove. Or if we bet river, if we bet like any reasonable amount. So let's just delete these. Let's say we bet and one player calls us on the 2 of spades. How do we feel? Little bit ahead, right? The problem, though, is that we're running into a lot of opponents, right? So let's just assume we bet and get called by 2 people, which will happen a decent amount of the time. You see now we're just already behind. If they all call, it's just terrible. Also, they may not have jacks or 10s in their range. Notice these are the hands we're trying to get value from, right? If we remove jacks and 10s from their range, it's just going to get really bad. You see, no equity, right? So if they don't really have overpairs in their range, you can't even value bet against one player. They probably do have overpairs in their range, though. But the thing is that when we go bet 4 ways on this board, they may just start folding out overpairs. Like, if I'm sitting here with pocket 9 somehow, it's just an easy fold. So anyway, this is like a pretty clear check in my mind.
And when the big blind checks to me, we have a decision to make whether...
By the way, if you are going to bet, you want to bet tiny. Same thing as on the turn, pretty much. We don't even have the range advantage, so you want to check. But if you are going to bet, you want to bet small.
We want to block bet, or we can just check because the button player has the propensity to bluff a lot.
Ooh, that's some good information. Player on the button likes to bluff. It's a very good reason to check. Because if you bet, a lot of the people who like to bluff, if they are going to bluff, they're going to rip it all in on you, which you don't really want. And if you do go bet 4 ways on flop, turn, and river, they're probably not going to bluff you because it's pretty clear you like your hand, right? So this is a spot where knowing that, I think we have a very clear check.
Ultimately, I take the line of checking here, and now onto the button. He doesn't take too long before announcing his action.
I'm sorry? You said all in? Okay, I just want to make sure. All in.
All in. Ooh. If it goes fold. This is a nasty spot, but I think it's actually a call if they fold around to us. Because, assuming Rampage Poker's read is right, which I'm going to presume it is, he seems to be, very competent poker player here. If you think your opponent bluffs a lot, when all of the draws miss, and it's checked on the river, check, all in. Well, check, all in. You got to presume this player is going to bluff some portion of the time. Now, very important. If there are 3 people yet to act, and this guy bets into 2 more people who have not acted yet, I'd be way more inclined to fold. But let's say the blinds both checked, and now I check, and then this player to my left is last to act. then I'm way more inclined to call. Because whenever he's checking, or when he's betting into two people who have not acted yet on the river, he has to worry that they could just be sitting here slow playing the nuts, right? But when the players in the blinds both check, and then I check, he doesn't really have to worry about the players in the blinds having a very premium hand, because if they had a very premium hand, they would often value bet themselves, right? So this is a spot where the player who goes all in's relative position is vitally important. Okay, let's see what happens.
That's right. It is a $5,000 all-in, and the big blind doesn't take too long, maybe 10 seconds, to make his decision.
So 2x pot all in.
Take call. Okay, fuck.
Big blind calls pretty immediately. Rampage has an easy fold. In reality, this is just a trivially easy fold at this point. On the river, when it goes 2x pot all in and call, like I don't even know what you're supposed to call with here. Probably supposed to call with like, do you call with a straight? I think a straight's close. Bad end of the straight's definitely a fold. The thing is you got to think about big blind's range, right? Let's actually consider this. Once it goes all in, what is going to call here? Ace 8, 9 8, 8 7, obviously. Full houses, obviously. Nines will fold. Maybe let's just like give them jacks to say that they have one jacks. So let's give them this range to call. So this guy's range is loose, okay? We're just going to ignore this guy's range for now. This guy's range is loose, but this guy who calls must have a good hand, right? Our equity against the guy who calls is 33%, right? And whatever equity the other guy has, he's going to have the nuts sometimes, right? That's just going to decrease it as well. Because we have to beat this player here who has a lot of nut hands. Obviously, if this player doesn't have pocket jacks in his range or any overpairs, then we're dead, right? So this is a spot where even if the big blind is like loose and splashy, this is still just an easy fold. It's only going to be anywhere near a reasonable call if the player on the button who went all in is just insane, and the player in the big blind who called is just a super duper calling station and will call with stuff like all over pairs here, which seems unlikely. So pretty easy fold for the Pocket Kings.
And now on to us. The button with a 5K jam, the big blind with essentially a snap call of 4,400 total. We cover both, and I think now we have a pretty clear decision to make. Essentially easy decision to make to, I guess, fold and let this one go, unfortunately. So we take one last look at our cards, kiss this one goodbye, and send it to the muck. And good thing we get to see what the other players had, because the button shows pocket fives.
Pocket fives! Ah, he did run the $5,000 bluff. I mean, good read by Rampage, right?
So bottom pair, I don't think that's going to win it. The big blind, please show us trips or something. He shows pocket queens for another one pair holding that we could have beat. And that is how we lost a potential $16,000 pot at 1-2.
Rampage must be thinking, queen. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Guy snap called with queens too, by the way. 10-second call, $5,000, bad bluff catcher. Sure, why not? Look, I don't fault the way Rampage played this hand on a lot of the betting rounds. I think it seems perfectly reasonable. And, well, if anything, I would have played the hand slower. So on the flop, I would have checked. To be fair, the guy with pocket fives probably would have bet. The guy with queens, for all I know, would have just raised, and I would have folded immediately. Folded the best hand immediately. But you got to realize, when you're playing very multi-way, and everybody wants to put in a lot of money, and they all have a lot of nuts in their range, or at least in their potential range, that makes logical sense, you just got to play really, really cautiously. I have a decent amount of courses over at pokercoaching.com specifically discussing multi-way pots, because this is a tricky spot where a lot of people just drastically overplay their normally strong hands, like pocket kings. And a lot of money that you make from the small stakes games is just going to come from value betting, having your opponents call with junk or hands that are dominated. But when they want to put all of their money in, all $5,000 of it at 1-2, you probably have to get out of the way. I can't talk, go figure. Long video, huh? You probably have to get out of the way. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think. It's something a little bit different. Huge thanks to Rampage Poker for letting me use his content. Make sure you follow him here on YouTube. Click the link below for that. Also, if you like this video, click the like and subscribe buttons and the notification bell. We're going to try to get above 10% today. You're going to make it happen. Thank you very much. Good luck in your games, and I'll talk to you next time.